Hi, and welcome to our video on Unit 705, Leading Strategic Change. This is just a short 10 to 15 minute video to help you get started on writing your assignment. I'm going to hand over to one of our IMPD tutors, James.
Thank you, Charlotte. Hello, everybody. So we'll just spend the next 10-15 minutes, as Charlotte says, running through this assignment. It's quite a nice one, this one, actually, if I dare say. But there's a few pointers I'll try and bring your attention to as we run through the piece of work here. This unit is based on leading strategic change. This is probably something which is a focus of strategy when we get into execution of strategy. So anyway, I teach strategy. So I think the two concepts are quite interrelated. And you might well find that some of the concepts that you touch on strategy come into leading change as well, and vice versa. So don't be too het up about the wording here. This is a strategic focused unit. We're just going to focus on the sharp end of strategy and how we make it work here is I think a good way to look at it. Like all our assignments here, the first learning outcome is to do with the basic definitions, principles, drivers for the theme. And then in the second learning outcome, you're going to go ahead and apply the whole concept and theory to where you are in a particular organizational context. So it's a real proposal. We'll look at that in the second learning outcome. Let's get straight into it then. So first learning outcome is to understand the scope and context of strategic change. We're going to start off with discussing the scope, context, and drivers for organizational change here. So our three golden rules, which we encourage you to apply to every single response, are to make any definitions that are required. So you read the question and anything that kind of stands out to you as being a bit arguable or fluffy, we're going to make a nice definition of it to give your work clarity. Also, we're going to mind the command verb. We'd advise that you print out a list of the command verb definitions you'll have been sent through and make sure that your answers are directly related to the command verb. It's the most common reason why people are referred. It's because they haven't just answered the question in the correct way. And the final thing is to apply less is more. Because of the word count being relatively tight, you don't have the scope to talk about all the things you might like to do. So you're going to be very focused on the question. Typically, we'd recommend that you bring in between 2 to 4 different models, theories, contrasting opinions, or something of that nature in order to answer most of the questions. But I'll illustrate this as we go through. So discussing the scope, context, and drivers for organizational change. Here, I mean, organizational change, you could potentially make a definition of what we mean by that. Why is an organizational change different from any other type of change, for example? What marks out that thing? I mean, it's fairly obvious, but you still might want to just kind of put some boundaries and some key definition points in there, perhaps. We're going to discuss, which means we're going to put arguments for and against. It's important to bring the contrasting opinions in at this level, and that's the case for nearly all the questions. We're looking to how the thing might not be right. We're going to test everything critically as we go through our answers here, and that's the same with the command verb discuss. And we're going to look at 3 particular things: scope of organizational change, the context of it, and the drivers for it. For drivers, straight away, I'd recommend you look at 2 aspects of that. One is the internal drivers for change, which could include things like internal leadership, internal stakeholders and shareholders. You could talk around vision and values, all that kind of stuff. Capability, USPs could drive change. There's all sorts of different things. So you've got the internal realm. The external realm might include competition, politics, external shareholders, and various sort of things, disruptors, all sorts of different aspects there. So I'd encourage you to think about both the internal and external drivers for change when you come to that. But there's plenty to talk about there, actually, when you get into the question. It shouldn't hopefully cause too many issues when you get into it. 1.2 then is we're going to critically appraise the complexities of leading strategic change. So here, I think in terms of definitions, you might want to first establish what you think some of the complexities of leading strategic change could be. So changing landscapes, political change, again, all the kind of pest or pestel elements that can drive organizations, internal change of personnel, consistency, timescales, resourcing changing, assumptions not being quite right. So many things, again, you could talk around here. But once you've got a list of some of the complexities, you're in a position to go ahead and critically appraise each of them. And again, that's where you're going to apply your less is more. So I'd suggest you might list a few candidates and then select maybe 2 to 4 particular ones to fully critically appraise. How do they impact on leading strategic change? What gets in the way of strategic change the most, in your opinion? What context do certain things dial up the most potentially? So there's quite a bit to but you must apply the critical appraisal in your answer of several different complexities of leading strategic change in the way that you've defined that. Okay, it might be worthwhile here, again, if you haven't in 1.1, making sure you've got a definition of strategic change in the answer somewhere between 1.1 and 1.2. We're going to use the same definition again here in 1.3 then, which is we're going to critically evaluate theories and models for leading and managing strategic change. So we've got a definition of strategic change in 1.1 and 1.2, which you can bring in here and use. We're going to apply a critical evaluation now. So the command verb here means that you must provide, again, evidence for, evidence against. But the difference here is you're going to come up with an opinion, a view, a considered synthesis of that consideration here. So for each of the theories and models you're going to evaluate, you have to come up with a kind of position on them, each of them based on the evidence you've found. And I think, Charlotte, this one is one that we get the highest referrals on, isn't it?
Yeah, 1.3 is
Yep.
a fairly common referral on this unit, and I think it's mainly to do with that command verb and making sure that people have
Yep.
met the critical evaluation required for the AC.
Yeah, yeah, and this is consistent with my experience on this one as well, supporting it. So I think it's just that whatever theories and models you use, and again, I'd suggest you choose between 2 and 4 specific ones. Your job is to critically evaluate each of them, which means to go through the whole process, pros, cons, context, considerations, assumptions, but then an end point of what you think are on each of those theories and models for leading and managing strategic change. So that's a job done then for the first learning outcome once that's done. And again, there's lots of different models, suggested in the guidance here. If it was me, I would certainly be looking at having a look at the Kotter's change model. You can find that in Accelerate the book or Iceberg is Melting and Change, the more recent book he's done as well. I'd certainly go to that one as one of mine. Kurt Lewin has several as well. And you've got McKinsey's 7S model and various others that are put in here as well. So choose your poison, that's fine, but 2 to 4, and then you're going to form a full critical appraisal of each of them would be really good. Well, it's not mentioned there, I don't think, is change curve. That's something that I'd like to teach, and that's looking at the psychology of change and how that lands with people based on the Kubler-Ross change curve theory. So again, it doesn't matter what you choose, as long as what you choose is nice and contrasty. Try to choose models that are different from each other and then perform a nice full critical evaluation of each of them. And that's that question answered. We're then going to go into the second learning outcome here, and this is in 2 parts. So the first one is you're going to develop a proposal for leading strategic change. Okay. And then in 2.2, we're going to reflect on how approaches to leadership can be applied to deliver that strategy for change. Okay. So here in 2.1, develop is the command verb. We've already kind of defined what we mean by strategic change earlier in the assignment. And here we're talking around develop, which implies from basic principles up. So ideally, you've got a start point, some evidence, some starting point that you're going to then develop a proposal through. That might include where we don't do change so well right now. Some real good, evidential based lived experience in there for where perhaps change doesn't work. Many organizations, the statistics would suggest at least, are pretty poor at doing change, really. There's lots of evidence that suggests anywhere between 50 and 80% of organizational change fails. So we've got plenty to talk about here in practice. So we're going to propose develop a proposal of how we're going to do this thing really effectively. Okay, ideally what we want to do is bring in a specific change in mind and make sure you're going to apply all the theory in a real world context here. So how would you really do it? Who would do what where? maybe use one of the theories and models for change, or a couple of them that you've already critically evaluated in the previous question. It would make sense to use the work you've already done in reverse learning outcome and show the application of it here in 2.1 and 2.2. Okay, so a big thing here I would just point out as well is ensuring that you've got something pretty thorough in there for how you're going to measure the effect of the change. So some nice granular waypoints, milestones, whatever you call them, but what would look like success in the change? And again, one potential thing to consider here, or two probably, would be think about balanced scorecard approach potentially, or you could think around the Kirkpatrick 4 levels of evaluation, which measure the time that change takes and different things that happen over different times. So you're looking at not just what we call kind of the lead indicators, the end point, but the trail indicators, which is the end bit, but the inputs as well, the lead indicators, which have to happen before that. So it's a nice, timely and balanced approach to measuring success here in whatever changes you have in mind. The next thing then is you're going to focus in 2.2 on approaches to leadership can be applied to deliver this strategy. So they're looking here for you to look at particular approaches to leadership. So it mentions authentic leadership, entrepreneurial, transformational. That might be something to think about with change in mind. Situational leadership from Blanchard and Hersey talks around development pathways and journeys that might facilitate change, you could argue as well. So you're going to look here into more than one approach to leadership. So again, 2 to 4 will be, the kind of range we're looking at here. And you're going to try and figure out, on reflection, how those approaches can be applied to deliver the strategy. And again, I think we have referrals on this one. It's probably due to that reflect command verb, Charlotte.
Yeah, it's quite common for this one to be referred, and again, it's the command verb, it's reflect.
Yep.
So just for everyone to keep an eye on that as well.
Yeah. So reflect implies what you're asked to do is actually bring some of your own lived experience into this as well. Reflect on your own delivery of change as well in the past, and leadership approaches maybe you've used or seen. So it requires to demonstrate that reflection of what's happened around different approaches, and maybe what could be done differently and better in the future will be necessary for this. But again, our advice is to read the command verb definitions thoroughly to ensure that you're very clear on how to answer the question in the requested way. And that's pretty much this one done. So nice treatment of all the kind of forces for and against and the drivers and options for change in the first learning outcome, then an application of that in the real world, learning outcome 2, including a nice reflection of how we lead effectively to deliver that particular strategy around change. And that is Unit 705 in just over 10 minutes.
That's great. Thanks so much, James. We're looking forward to receiving all of your assignments. And if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you so much.